There exists a particular kind of vertigo that arrives not from standing at a cliff's edge, but from the recognition that no one is coming to tell you what matters. The ground doesn't fall away beneath you, it simply reveals itself to have been constructed all along, and constructed by others. What felt like bedrock turns out to be convention, inheritance, and consensus. And in that moment of recognition, something both terrifying and exhilarating occurs. You realize you are permitted to choose differently, not required to, not guaranteed safety in doing so, simply permitted. This permission is not a gift of modernity, though we speak of it more openly now. It is an old vertigo, one that has attended human consciousness since the first person looked at the customs of their tribe and felt, wordlessly, that something essential was missing. The question is not whether values can be chosen. History shows they always have been, even when disguised as revelation or tradition, but whether we possess the particular form of courage required to choose them consciously, to stand in the open space where inherited certainty used to be, and build something there. The word courage itself offers a clue. It comes from the Latin cor, meaning heart, and in its oldest usage carried the sense of speaking one's mind by telling all one's heart. To have courage was to reveal what you truly held inside, to make visible your inner conviction, but choosing your own values demands something more unsettling than revelation. It requires you to generate conviction in the absence of external confirmation, to hold a position that cannot point to authority beyond your own gradually accumulated sense of what is true. This is not the courage of the battlefield, where the rightness of the cause can be proclaimed and shared, where your death serves a story everyone already agrees upon. This is the courage of the person who quietly stops participating in a form of life they can no longer honestly inhabit, knowing full well that their reasons may never be legible to those around them, that they may be diminishing themselves in the eyes of others for the sake of an integrity only they can measure. We might begin by acknowledging what is lost in this recognition. There is a particular comfort in the inherited value system, in the world where meaning arrives already assembled, tested across generations, and sanctified by time or tradition or divine mandate. You are born into a story about what matters, and your task is to find your place within it. The roles are known, the virtues are specified, the sacrifices asked of you have been made meaningful in advance. In such a world, you suffer, certainly, but your suffering has a shape, a context, a place in the order of things. The medieval peasant breaking his back in the field understood his labor as participation in a cosmic hierarchy. His exhaustion was not simply exhaustion, it was his station, his ordained role in the great chain of being that stretched from the lowest worm to the highest angel. The meaning was terrible, perhaps, but it was there. He did not have to generate it. Contrast this with the particular despair of the person in modernity who works just as hard, just as long, but cannot locate the meaning of their effort anywhere outside the immediate economic transaction. They are told their work has value, that their contribution matters, but these assurances ring hollow because they rest on no foundation the person can actually touch. The value is instrumental, provisional, and subject to market revision. And so they work, and they are tired, and the tiredness is just tiredness. It doesn't connect to anything larger, doesn't feed into any story about who they are or what their life is for. This is the background condition against which the question of chosen values arises. We find ourselves in a world where the old containers of meaning have become transparent, where we can see the contingency of every value system and the historical specificity of every moral framework. The anthropologist's gaze has turned inward, and we recognize that our own convictions are no less culturally constructed than those of any distant tribe. And yet we still have to live, still have to decide what to do with our time, and still have to determine what is worth protecting and what should be let go. The existentialists name this condition, though they did not invent it. Sartre's famous phrase, "existence precedes essence," was an attempt to describe the raw fact of being thrown into the world without a predetermined nature, without an instruction manual for being human. You exist first, and only afterwards do you create your essence through the choices you make. This is often misread as a celebration of freedom, but Sartre was quite clear about the anguish involved. Freedom of this kind is not liberation, it is condemnation. You are condemned to be free, condemned to choose, and condemned to take responsibility for what you make of yourself in a universe that offers no guidance. But there is something incomplete in the existentialist framing, something that misses a crucial dimension of the experience. The vertigo of choosing your own values is not only about the absence of cosmic guidance, it is also about the presence of all the previous guidance, still echoing, still making its claims on you. You are not choosing in a void. You are choosing against something, or away from something, or in dialogue with something. The inherited values have not disappeared. They have simply lost their automatic authority. They are still there, still speaking, still exerting pressure on your conscience. This is why the choice feels like betrayal as often as it feels like freedom. To choose your own values is to break faith with the community that raised you, with the tradition that shaped you, and with the parents who sacrificed so you might have a better life, a life that, it turns out, you now define differently than they would. The guilt is not irrational. Something real is being violated. The unspoken contract that you would carry forward what was given to you, that you would honor the source by perpetuating its form. Consider the experience of the person who grows up in a devoutly religious household and gradually realizes they no longer believe. The loss of faith is often described in terms of intellectual honesty, as though the problem were simply one of evidence and argument, but the deeper difficulty is relational. To stop believing is to step outside the moral universe that constitutes your family's shared world. It is to announce, whether gently or sharply, that you no longer see what they see, value what they value, or hope for what they hope for. You are not simply changing your mind, you are changing the ground on which mutual recognition rests. And yet, to not make this choice, to continue participating in forms you no longer honestly inhabit, is its own kind of violence, a violence against whatever in you registers truth, whatever refuses to be bargained away for the sake of comfort or belonging. This is the impossible position. Both paths feel like betrayal. To stay is to betray yourself. To leave is to betray the world that made you. The courage required is not the courage to do the right thing, there may be no right thing, but the courage to act from your deepest conviction even when you cannot be certain, even when you will lose something precious in the process. The philosopher Charles Taylor has written extensively about what he calls the malaise of modernity, the sense of flatness and loss that accompanies the decline of traditional moral horizons. But he also notes something crucial. The movement toward authenticity, toward self-determination, is not simply a rejection of the past. It is a different way of relating to the question of value, one that places the locus of moral authority in the individual's direct encounter with what matters, rather than in external codes or collective mandates. This shift carries dangers, certainly. The language of authenticity can be hijacked by narcissism, by the shallow insistence that whatever I want must be valuable simply because I want it. The marketplace is full of such distortions, self-help programs promising to help you discover your values as though they were already hiding inside you, waiting to be revealed, as though the task were one of excavation rather than construction. But the corruption of an idea does not negate its substance. The fact that authenticity can be trivialized does not mean the original impulse was trivial. The original impulse, as nearly as we can trace it, has something to do with the recognition that moral life cannot be entirely outsourced. You can follow the rules, obey the commandments, fulfill the social expectations, and still experience a fundamental hollowness, a sense that you are performing someone else's life. And this hollowness is not simply a psychological complaint, it is a moral danger. A person who has never tested their values, never examined them, and never chosen them is vulnerable in ways they may not recognize until the moment of crisis arrives. We see this in the studies of people who participated in historical atrocities, not the zealots or sadists, but the ordinary functionaries who simply did what they were told, who followed the values they inherited without ever pausing to ask whether those values deserved their allegiance. Hannah Arendt's phrase, "the banality of evil," points to this phenomenon. The horror produced not by monstrous conviction, but by the absence of conviction, by people who never developed the capacity to think for themselves, to stand apart from the collective judgment, and to ask, but is this right? This is one reason why the courage to choose your own values is not merely a personal luxury, but a civic necessity. A society composed entirely of people who have never questioned their inheritance is a society primed for collective madness, for the kind of moral catastrophe that afterwards seems incomprehensible. How could so many people participate? How could so few resist? The answer, often, is that resistance requires a prior act of separation, a prior development of independent judgment. It requires that you have already practiced the difficult art of standing alone. But let's not make this too grand. The question of chosen values does not only arise in moments of historical crisis. It arises in the quiet accumulation of daily choices, the gradual awareness that the life you are living does not align with what you actually care about. You notice that you are working toward goals you don't believe in, maintaining relationships that feel hollow, and pursuing achievements that bring no satisfaction. And the question forms itself, what am I doing this for? This question is dangerous because it has no easy answer. You cannot simply consult the guidebook, the tradition, or the authority. Or rather, you can, but their answers no longer have automatic purchase on your conscience. They offer suggestions, not commands. And so you are thrown back on yourself, on your own capacity to discern what matters, to weigh competing goods, to imagine a different way of living, and then decide whether it is worth the cost of pursuing it. The process is not heroic. It is slow, uncertain, and frequently revised. You try on different values and different ways of organizing your priorities, and some of them fit, and some of them don't. You make commitments that later reveal themselves to be mistakes. You abandon projects that perhaps deserved more patience. The clarity you thought you had achieved turns out to be partial, provisional, and subject to revision as new experience accumulates. This is why the language of discovering your values, while not entirely wrong, can be misleading. It suggests that the values are already there, complete and waiting, and your task is merely to uncover them. But the experience is more like building than finding. You construct your values through the choices you make, the habits you develop, and the stories you tell yourself about what kind of person you are becoming. And the structure you build is always under construction, always being tested against new situations, and always capable of collapsing if its foundations turn out to be weaker than you thought. There is a particular scene worth lingering on, the moment when you realize you have already chosen differently than you thought. You believed you valued career success above all else, and then you discovered that you had quietly been prioritizing time with your children, turning down opportunities that would have required greater sacrifice at home. Or you believed you valued security, and then you noticed that you kept taking risks, keeping choosing the uncertain path when the safe one was available. The values you actually hold, the ones revealed in action rather than intention, turn out to be different from the ones you claimed. This discrepancy is not necessarily a failure. It might be information. It might be the signal that some deeper part of you knows something your conscious mind has not yet admitted. The question is whether you can listen to that signal, whether you can allow your articulated values to be corrected by your lived ones, or whether you will insist on the story you have already told yourself, even as it grows increasingly distant from the life you are actually living. The philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre argues that modern moral philosophy has fallen into a kind of incoherence precisely because it has severed values from the context of a complete human life. In pre-modern frameworks, virtues made sense as qualities that helped you fulfill your role, achieve your telos, and become the kind of person your tradition called you to be. But once we lose agreement on what a human life is for, once we can no longer point to a shared conception of the good life, virtues become arbitrary preferences, values become subjective choices, and moral argument becomes impossible. MacIntyre's diagnosis is persuasive, but his proposed solution, a return to tradition, to the kind of community that can sustain a shared moral vision, may not be available to us, or may only be available at a cost we are unwilling to pay. The world that could produce such communities has largely vanished, replaced by conditions of pluralism, mobility, and moral diversity that cannot simply be wished away. We are, for better or worse, the inheritors of the Enlightenment project, the project that placed the individual at the center and asked them to think for themselves. But perhaps the question is not whether we can return to pre-modern certainty, but whether we can develop new forms of moral seriousness adequate to our condition. This would not mean abandoning tradition, history, or community, quite the opposite. It would mean engaging with them consciously and dialogically as sources of wisdom rather than sources of command. It would mean learning to hold your convictions firmly while remaining open to revision, to stand for something while recognizing the contingency of your standing. This is a difficult balance, one that many people never achieve. Some collapse into relativism, into the belief that all values are equally arbitrary, that there is no ground for preferring one to another. Others harden into dogmatism, clinging to their chosen values with a rigidity that betrays their underlying uncertainty. Both responses are failures of nerve, ways of avoiding the genuine difficulty of living with chosen values, which is that you must hold them as both absolutely binding and ultimately provisional, as demanding your full allegiance while remaining open to the possibility that you are wrong. The psychologist Rollo May wrote about the courage to create, the particular form of bravery required to bring something new into being in the face of uncertainty and potential failure. Choosing your own values is a species of this courage. You are creating, not in the sense of inventing ex nihilo, but in the sense of assembling, selecting, emphasizing, taking what the tradition offers, and combining it in ways that answer to your particular situation, your particular constellation of gifts and limitations, and your historical moment. This is not the grandiose creation of the genius, the prophet, or the revolutionary, though it may occasionally rise to that. It is the modest, daily creation of the person who decides, quietly, what they will care about, what they will protect, and what they will sacrifice for. It is the parent who chooses to prioritize presence over achievement. It is the artist who chooses to make difficult work that may never find an audience. It is the professional who chooses to maintain standards that others have abandoned. It is the friend who chooses to show up, year after year, for someone who cannot reciprocate. These choices do not announce themselves. They do not come with fanfare or validation. Often, no one notices them except the person making them, and even then, the noticing may come late, in retrospect, when the pattern of a life becomes visible. You look back and realize, this is what I actually valued. This is what I was willing to pay for. This is what I protected when everything else was negotiable. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming yourself, of differentiating from the collective while remaining in relationship with it. The process requires separating from the unconscious identification with family, culture, and tradition, not in order to reject them, but in order to meet them consciously, to take from them what genuinely serves your development and leave what doesn't. Jung was adamant that this process was not selfish. It was the fulfillment of your deepest obligation, the obligation to become what you are capable of becoming. But Jung also recognized the danger of inflation, of mistaking the ego's desires for the self's direction. The person who chooses their own values walks a narrow path between two forms of self-betrayal. Betraying yourself by conforming to external expectations, and betraying yourself by inflating your ego to the point where it recognizes no authority beyond its own whims. The middle path requires discernment, the capacity to distinguish between the voice of authentic conviction and the voice of fear, resentment, or pride. How do you develop this discernment? Partly through error, through discovering which choices lead to flourishing and which to diminishment. Partly through dialogue, through testing your convictions against the perspectives of others who may see what you cannot. Partly through attention to your own experience, to the moments when your life feels aligned and the moments when it feels askew, and the slow work of understanding what accounts for the difference. There is no algorithm for this, no method that guarantees success. You are feeling your way forward in partial darkness, guided by lights that may or may not be reliable. The courage required is not the courage of certainty that would be easier, but the courage of continuing to act, continuing to choose, even when you cannot be sure, even when the ground remains uncertain. Consider the archetype of the hero in mythology. The hero leaves the known world, ventures into the wilderness or the underworld, faces trials and ordeals, and returns transformed, bearing gifts for the community. Joseph Campbell mapped this structure across countless traditions and called it the monomyth, the hero's journey. But what is often missed in popular readings of Campbell is that the hero's journey is not fundamentally about achievement or conquest. It is about transformation, about the death of the old self and the birth of the new. The hero who returns is not the same person who left. Something has been sacrificed, and something has been gained. To choose your own values is to enter a version of this journey. You leave the security of inherited meaning, venture into the uncertainty where you must decide for yourself, face the trials of isolation and doubt, and return if you return with a different relationship to value itself. You no longer hold your values because they were given to you. You hold them because you have tested them, suffered for them, and discovered their capacity to sustain you through difficulty. This is not a journey everyone completes. Many people begin it and turn back, unable to bear the loneliness, the vertigo, and the loss of certainty. They return to the inherited framework, but now with a kind of bad faith, a resentment toward those who continued forward, and a defensive insistence that the old ways are the only ways. Others complete the journey, but become lost in it, unable to return, unable to re-establish connection with community and tradition. They achieve a kind of purity, but at the cost of isolation, speaking a language no one else understands and holding values no one else shares. The successful completion, if we can call it that, involves returning with your newly chosen values and finding a way to live them in the world, among others, without demanding that everyone else follow the same path. This is harder than it sounds. There is a strong temptation, having discovered something valuable, to insist that others see it too, to become evangelical about your own revelation. But the whole point of choosing your own values is that they are yours, emerging from your particular path, your particular constitution, and your particular moment. To insist that they become universal is to betray the very principle that allowed you to discover them. And yet, paradoxically, there is something universal in the process itself, even if the content varies. The structure of the hero's journey applies across cultures precisely because it describes something fundamental about human development, about the necessity of leaving and returning, of breaking away and reintegrating. Your particular values may be unique to you, but the need to choose them, to take responsibility for them, to stand by them, this is shared. We might think here of Abraham, called by God to leave his homeland, his family, and his father's house and go to a land he does not know. Abraham's obedience is often held up as the model of faith, but there is something more unsettling in the story. God asks Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, his beloved son, the carrier of the promise. Abraham agrees, takes Isaac up the mountain, raises the knife, and at the last moment, an angel stops him and provides a ram for the sacrifice instead. What kind of test is this? What kind of God demands such a thing? Kierkegaard meditates on this story in Fear and Trembling, and he sees in it the ultimate paradox of faith. Abraham must be willing to violate the ethical, to commit what would ordinarily be murder, because God commands it. But how does Abraham know it is God commanding and not his own delusion, his own projection? He doesn't. He cannot. He acts in the absence of certainty, in what Kierkegaard calls the teleological suspension of the ethical, trusting in something beyond all rational justification. This is an extreme case, obviously, and we are not called to anything like Abraham's ordeal in our daily lives. But the structure is instructive. To choose your own values sometimes requires you to violate what others consider ethical, to act on a conviction that cannot be justified in terms of the existing moral framework. You must be willing to appear foolish, irresponsible, and selfish, and you must be willing to accept that you might, in fact, be wrong. That the voice you are following might not be divine guidance, but your own confusion. The risk is real. There is no insurance policy, no guarantee that your chosen values will lead to flourishing rather than disaster. History is full of people who acted on deep conviction and produced terrible consequences, who believed they were following truth and were, in fact, following delusion. And yet, The alternative, never acting on conviction at all, never trusting your own judgment, never stepping outside the safety of consensus, produces its own kind of disaster, the slow death of never having lived your own life. There is a phrase from Rilke that feels relevant here, though it appears in a different context. He writes about the necessity of living the questions, of dwelling in uncertainty without rushing to premature answers. Have patience with everything unresolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will, then, gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. To choose your own values is to live the questions. What matters? What is worth protecting? What deserves my energy, my time, and my life? These questions do not have final answers. They evolve as you evolve, as your circumstances change, and as you learn more about yourself and the world. The values you hold at 30 may not serve you at 50. The commitments that felt essential in one phase of life may need to be released in another. This is not failure. It is responsiveness, the willingness to let your values grow as you grow. But this responsiveness must be distinguished from mere drift, from the passive absorption of whatever values happen to be fashionable or convenient. There is a difference between revising your values through genuine encounter with new experience and abandoning them because they have become difficult to maintain. The former is maturation, the latter is capitulation. And learning to tell the difference requires the very discernment we have been discussing, the capacity to listen deeply to what actually matters to you, beneath the noise of social pressure and ego defense. Perhaps the deepest courage required is not the courage to choose your values in the first place, but the courage to keep choosing them, day after day, when no one is watching, when no reward is forthcoming, when the world shows no sign of caring whether you maintain your integrity or let it quietly erode. This is the courage of constancy, of commitment in the absence of reinforcement, of continuing to tend something you value even when its value is not recognized by anyone else. Consider the person who chooses to live with integrity in a corrupt system. They do not blow the whistle, do not become a martyr, and do not make dramatic gestures. They simply refuse, in small ways, to participate in the corruption. They maintain standards that others have abandoned. They tell the truth when it would be easier to lie. They treat people with dignity when the system treats them as disposable, and nothing changes. The system continues. The corruption persists. Their integrity has no measurable impact on anything outside themselves. Is this futility? Or is this precisely the point? The value of integrity is not instrumental, it is intrinsic. You maintain it not because it will produce results, not because it will change the world, but because it is what allows you to live with yourself, to meet your own gaze in the mirror, and to go to sleep at night without the corrosion of knowing you have betrayed what you claim to hold dear. This is not a small thing. For many people, it is the only thing that makes life bearable. But we should not romanticize this position. The person of integrity in a corrupt system pays a cost. They are passed over for promotion. They are marginalized, isolated, and sometimes punished. They watch others advance by abandoning the very standards they maintain, and they must live with the knowledge that their refusal to participate makes no difference to anyone but themselves. This is a lonely position, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. And yet, something else is also true. The person who abandons their values for the sake of success, who participates in what they know to be wrong because it is expedient, who tells themselves that they will maintain their integrity later, once they have achieved security or power or influence, this person is making a different kind of sacrifice, one that may ultimately be more costly. They are sacrificing their relationship to themselves, their capacity to trust their own judgment, and their ability to believe that their convictions mean anything at all. There is a kind of spiritual death that occurs when you become someone who does not keep faith with yourself, who cannot rely on your own word, who has learned to override your deepest convictions for the sake of external rewards. And this death is often invisible, gradual, normalized. You do not wake up one day and realize you have lost yourself. You simply notice, if you notice at all, that life has become flat, that success brings no satisfaction, that achievement feels hollow, that you have everything you thought you wanted, and it turns out to be nothing at all. This is the trap that the language of success and achievement often sets. It promises that once you reach a certain level, once you accomplish certain goals, then you will have the luxury of attending to meaning, to values, to what actually matters. But by the time you arrive, you have often become someone incapable of recognizing what matters, someone who has trained themselves so thoroughly in the art of strategic compromise that they no longer remember what it feels like to act from conviction rather than calculation. The way out of this trap, if there is one, involves a kind of reversal, attending to values first, letting them guide your choices, and allowing success or failure to be secondary consequences rather than primary aims. This is not a recipe for worldly achievement. It may, in fact, be a recipe for worldly failure, depending on what your chosen values demand of you. But it is a recipe for something else, a life that feels like yours, a life that makes sense from the inside, even if it looks incomprehensible from the outside. We are circling back now to the original vertigo, the recognition that no one is coming to tell you what matters. This recognition is not, finally, a tragedy. It is a doorway. It is the moment when adult moral life becomes possible, when you stop being a child waiting for permission and become a person capable of standing for something, of choosing something, of orienting yourself in the world according to principles that you have tested and claimed as your own. This does not mean you must construct your values from nothing, rejecting all inheritance, all tradition, and all wisdom that has been passed down. Quite the opposite. The most mature relationship to value involves deep engagement with what has come before, careful study of how others have answered the questions you are now facing, and humble recognition that you are not the first person to grapple with these difficulties. But it means engaging with the tradition as a participant rather than a subject, taking what serves and leaving what doesn't, and honoring the source while claiming the right to adapt, revise, and recombine. In this sense, choosing your own values is not a rejection of the past, but a way of entering into genuine conversation with it. You are no longer simply receiving, you are responding. You are saying, I see what you valued, and I understand why, and here is what I value, given who I am, given when I live, and given what I understand about the world. This is a mark of respect, actually, the respect of treating the tradition as something strong enough to survive your questions, flexible enough to accommodate your additions, and deep enough to reward your engagement. And perhaps this is where the courage becomes something other than courage, or something more than courage. It becomes a kind of faithfulness, not to any external authority, but to the process itself, to the ongoing work of making meaning, of attending to what matters, of living in a way that honors both your inheritance and your individuality. You are faithful to the question, even when the answers keep changing. You are faithful to the search, even when you keep discovering that what you thought was the destination was only another waypoint. There is a quality of patience required here that our culture rarely acknowledges. We are trained to want answers, solutions, clarity, and resolution. But the life of chosen values is not like that. It is more like a long conversation that you are having with yourself, with your tradition, with your community, and with the dead and the not yet born. The conversation never ends. New questions arise. Old answers prove insufficient. You revise, reconsider, and try again. And in this ongoing conversation, you gradually become someone, not the someone you were supposed to become, not the someone the world expected you to be, but the someone you are capable of becoming when you take seriously the work of choosing, when you develop the courage to stand by your choices, when you learn to live with the uncertainty that no external authority is going to confirm that you got it right. This is the strange courage we have been circling. Strange because it is not the courage of certainty, not the courage of knowing you are right, not the courage of having God or history or reason on your side. It is the courage of uncertainty, the courage of proceeding without guarantee, the courage of choosing anyway, of standing for something anyway, of building a life on ground you know to be shifting, but which is the only ground you have. In the end, perhaps the question is not whether you have chosen the right values, but whether you have chosen at all. Whether you have taken up the work of becoming responsible for your own life, rather than remaining a passive recipient of whatever values happen to be ambient in your environment. This is not a moral judgment on those who choose differently or who remain within traditional frameworks. There are many ways to live well, many ways to find meaning, and many ways to be faithful to what matters. But for those who find themselves in the position we have been describing, for those who have recognized that the inherited answers no longer hold, that the tradition no longer speaks with automatic authority, that they must, in some sense, choose for themselves, there is no going back. The recognition, once it arrives, cannot be unlearned. You can pretend it isn't there, you can try to suppress it, or you can busy yourself with distractions that prevent you from facing it. But it remains a quiet, persistent question at the back of your mind. What do you actually value, and are you living it? These questions do not demand immediate answers. They demand attention. They demand that you take seriously the work of discernment, that you develop the capacity to listen to your own experience, that you learn to distinguish between the values you inherit and the values you claim, and that you practice the difficult art of standing alone without collapsing into isolation and of thinking for yourself without losing connection to others. This is the work. It is not dramatic. It is not finished. It does not produce results that can be measured or displayed. But it is, perhaps, the work that makes you human in the fullest sense, not merely a creature of habit and conditioning, not merely a reflection of your environment, but a being capable of choice, capable of conviction, capable of living a life that answers to something other than comfort or convention or fear. The strange courage of choosing your own values is ultimately the courage to meet that capacity, to honor it, to develop it, to let it guide you even when the way forward is unclear. It is the courage to be responsible for your own life, to take seriously the fact that you will die having lived according to principles that were either chosen or merely absorbed, and that the difference matters not to the universe, which does not care, but to you, who must live with the choices you make and the person those choices shape you into becoming. This is what remains when the vertigo passes. Not certainty, not arrival, not resolution, but the quiet recognition that you are standing, that you chose to stand. That you are capable of continuing to stand even when the ground shifts beneath you, and that this capacity, this strange, difficult, necessary capacity, is perhaps the most valuable thing you have.